Welcome to a final chunk of advanced CSS or playing with CSS tools. Um, this little exercise is going to try to help us combine several of the things that we've been playing with into one. As a full disclaimer here, I have relied heavily on the W3 schools and combining many of the different techniques that they're using here. But the truth of the matter is that by the time I finished up this particular exercise, it was just much more efficient for me to start with some starter code and just write it all in. Within your instructional space, I've given you sample starter code as well as I've given you the answer. Now, the answer is incomplete and it isn't yours until you tweak it and make your own customizations to it. So please don't just copy and paste that, but go ahead and take a moment, read through the tutorial, listen to this video, and really try to grab an understanding of what's going on in that code. That being said, um, I started with a basic HTML block because that was what I needed. This was the basic stuff here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on try it yourself, and this is going to give me my basic stuff. Now I know that in the end, I'm going to be pushing this out to a Google embedded piece. So the truth of the matter is I don't really need this title chunk here. I do need a document type declared as HTML. I do need the HTML sandwich, which is what this is. I will need a header sandwich, which is what that is. And I'm just actually visually separating these just a little bit so you can get a better sense. And then, of course, I'm going to need some content in here. Um, so this is fine to get started with. In fact, I don't even really need this chunk in here, but that's fine. I relied heavily on the opacity piece here, and this is what I wanted to do in the end. If we take a look back here and we remember that once I got this out to a viewable published site, I could hover on this and it changed transparencies, and that was kind of fun. Now, what I'm trying to achieve here is this: is um, there is at least a technique in which we can manipulate. Oops, sorry. There's a technique in which we can manipulate CSS code to where we provide a kind of a opaque box that perhaps could sit up in this background here or up in this space here as a background to the title. And while in this particular case, the title is definitely high contrast against the background, if I wanted to add a my own picture as that background, and if in particular that picture were busy and I wanted this text to stand out, I might want to put this in a box, make it somewhat opaque, and give it a color so that it kind of pops out. And my inspiration for that was back here on the CSS opacity transparency area. If I scroll all the way down, um, it comes to this. So this is kind of like what I'm looking to do. But of course, I want, this text to be a true header text, and I want it to be in the center, and I want it to have a fancier font. And I'm not crazy about that background, obviously. Um, However, playing with this particular code actually provided me more content or more starting points than I really needed. Furthermore, one of the other issues that I personally struggled with when I was playing with the opacity stuff is to understand that in a straightforward transparent box, when I add the opacity property and I've got text in there, the text also becomes opaque, which really doesn't work for me when I want it to kind of pop out against a background, right? There's no point in having an opaque box, opaque text, and then I've kind of defeated the purpose there. So I want to pay attention to that. So I combined the concept that we can play with the alpha value of an RGB and lay it in as a background. And so this was what inspired all of that. I encourage you to go back through and take a look at all of it at your convenience, or if you want to start here, certainly play with these examples because these were the foundation for a lot of what I'm about to do. So now I've got my try it editor, I've got my sample site, which is where I'm going to end up. And now I'm going to go ahead and start creating some stuff. Actually, before I get there, let me just do a couple of other things here. I have listed in your toolbox, I did use the color value combinations. I relied on the CSS box model to get me through all of this. I definitely went to the color picker, and I'm going to actually leave that one open because I may change colors on that later on. And last, I also used Google Fonts. So I leveraged the piece that we learned here in Google Fonts. So those are all the pieces that I used here to develop this little activity. So let's get going. The other thing is a full disclosure that you need to know is that for the purposes of this video, I've actually started, or I've actually completed all of the code, and I've got it centered, or I've got it sitting off to the side as a document because I don't want to bore you with watching me retype everything. So it's going to look as if I'm able to pull this stuff out of the air. It's not being pulled out of the air. It's already typed. I'm just going to explain it as I go along. So the first thing I'm going to do here is this. We know back from the font area that in order to pull in a Google font, I need a link.
Sorry, I'm not sure how to help.
Sorry, my Google Home thing is talking to me. Just ignore that. In order to pull that link in, I need to link directly to the API, to the Google API, in order to say that this is going to be the font that I want to use. Now, I'm not really defining any kind of font here. So I don't expect this to do any kind of change. I actually have to give a style to something and then use it. So the next thing I've got going here is in my header, I have added style sandwich, style chunk. And whatever I open in HTML, I need to also close. And so there it is. So what I'm going to define now is this tag called H1. And it's going to be H1. And I need to start the curly bracket. And I'm going to, and I've got this kind of pulled off to the side here. This is actually where I pull in the attribute of I want anytime I invoke an H1 to be this font family right here. And I've also got it in as a font size here, so I can manipulate the size. And then of course I need to close this with a curly bracket. So if I run that, now I can see that particular chunk coming in, and note that it's only applying to the header because that's the only one I want to apply that to. I haven't defined what a paragraph looks like, so I will not get anything but the standard there. For the moment, I'm going to leave that paragraph in there just so you can see the contrast. Not a critical attribute, but that's fine. The other thing I want to do right now is I want to play with this heading a little bit more, and because I know I want this to land in the center of my Google page, I'm going to go ahead and put in another HTML code, and I'm going to ask that header, every time that header runs, I want that to be in the center. And then finally, I want the color of that to be, I'm going to go with red for the moment, although that's where those color pickers come in, and you can change your color combinations anytime you want. Now, where was I going with that? That's fine. So that's my header block. The next thing I need to do is I need to set up a division container. And this division container is going to be something that will actually take on the opacity. And that's what I want it to do once I finally get to the point where I lay it in up here. I want it to be a division piece up here. Google has that built in natively as part of this, but you need to explicitly state it in your HTML code in order for that to work while it's up there. So I am going to do two different div boxes. And the first one, I'm going to just, again, I'm going to grab this over here. and I'm going to type in div and open curly bracket. And now, instead of explicitly stating a color or playing with those, I'm going to leverage the background color, and I'm going to go with RGB. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I want to play with the alpha channel of my content here. And I'm going to totally cheat in terms of my codes here in my final semicolon. Where do I get this color combination from? I can come over here to my color picker. Let me go with green. Here's my RGB values right there. So I can copy that and I can drop that in here. And once again, first of all, I haven't closed this particular box, which I need to do, otherwise it will squawk at me. I'm going to run this, but because I haven't applied this div to anything, it's not going to work, right? Now, if I come down here into my body and I put in a div sandwich here, and then run it, okay, there's my background. Looks pretty darn obnoxious if you ask me. Let me tone down or pick a different color altogether. Oof. Let's go with this. Oops, sorry. I need to go with the RGB values. Okay. Not great either, but whatever. All right, so I've got my dividing piece as a background in there. And then the next thing I need to do is I actually need to play with its opacity. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to back this out here. And once again, I am going to type in div, and I'm going to do a curly bracket. And this time I'm actually going to define a class. And a class is different from an H1 tag. And again, this is kind of like, somebody's life work in terms of understanding how to apply CSS and how to manipulate it. And these are really foundation concepts. But basically, we know we have a whole series of HTML tags, but then it basically stops there. So how do you define additional things? How do you make a web page do something to something other than an H1 tag or a paragraph tag, or you just want a blank slate and start over again? You can actually define this in classes. And so a class always starts with a dot and then the name, as opposed to a straight up HTML tag here. So I'm going to call this very verbosely transparent box. Now, do I need to use that entire phrase? No, but it's going to help me remember what the function is here. And this time what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to grab this particular code as a shortcut. And I'm going to just space that into position so that I can visually see that this is what I'm working with. It's the same up here, right? It's the same exact code. The only thing that's different here is this. I'm going to add an A there. The A stands for alpha. And the alpha is what controls the opacity. And this over here is shortcut for the three different values, red, green, and blue. And now I can add a comma and add let's do a 0.05. And remember that opacity goes from 0 to 1. So you're manipulating decimal points here. And if I run that, nothing exciting has happened. The key reason why nothing exciting has happened is because I have not invoked this particular transparent box div down here, right? So I could do a couple of different things. I could add a sub sandwich here, which I'm going to do, div and here I'm going to call it a class because that's how I've built it up here with the dot transparent box. Class is equal to, and I need to enclose this in parentheses, transparent box. And then I need to close that sandwich. And then because my tags need to nest, I need to close that sandwich there. So now if I run it, nothing particularly exciting is happening. And that's because my div here is kind of overriding it. In order to correct that, let me just take you through this one more time. I'm going to be pretty darn verbose in all of this. Note that I've got basically two sandwiches, and this is normally how we would definitely nest tags. So that's not the problem here. The problem here is this, is that it's going to be the outer sandwich is kind of taking over the inner sandwich here. And notice here that it's only the inner sandwich that actually has the transparency. It has the alpha value and it has the transparency. Could I have gotten away with just simply one div box and added the alpha here and put the transparency there? Yes, I could have. However, I wanted to be a little bit more verbose in terms of this teaching. So in order to correct this, because I'm expecting this box over here to be transparent, I'm going to take away the reference of this outer div. And I do not need it because I don't need to invoke it. And I hope that the video is showing you, but you can definitely see that the transparency has gone away. I can run that to 0.5. I can run it to 0.2, whatever I want to do. So this is the objective of what we are trying to go for here. Now, the only other thing that we could play with in terms of this is we could certainly go back and we could change up our font here. We could change up our size. We could change up our font color. We could change up our RGB value for the background. So right now this is sitting in as a kind of an orange look, right? But basically this is the content right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of it. I'm going to copy it, excuse me, and I'm going to come over here to my page. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. I'm going to click on embed, go to embed code, and there's my content there. And just for the sake of being able to visually move in and out, I'm going to see if there's any spacing here that I want to clean up really quick. Don't need to do this. So, don't make yourself crazy with this kind of stuff. This is just my craziness. So I'm going to go ahead and click on next and click on insert. And once again, it's got this goofy little paragraph down there, which is fine. And I think you guys by now have understood the point of that. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. I'm going to come back in here and I need to find that little paragraph tag and boom. Next, save it. And there it is. Okay. So not terribly impressive. Now I could get fancier and go back and add some of my box attributes, box model attributes, in terms of making the box bigger, making more padding in the box, etc. I might come back with an example on that, but for the moment, let's go ahead and get to the Pizazz here. So this is sitting in here, pretty straightforward. And this is really the content that I want in there. So I want this to be advanced CSS. Let me go ahead and add that before I jump up and start manipulating those boxes. So I'm going to say in my heading sandwich, this is where I want it to be, advanced CSS 3. Actually, you can call this anything you want. I think this is opacity. And again, just my being a little bit picky. Next and save it. And there you go. Okay. So I want this to go away. Let me take that away. Note that when I do that, now I'm going to move this particular chunk into that position up there. And I'm going to size it the way I want. And size it the way I want. And that is basically the heart and soul of it. But we can go a step further. The first thing I want to do is I actually want to change that background. Instead of that orange, I want to go in and change that to a color combination of white. So I'm going to come to my definition for my div box and make that white. And I'm going to, just for the sake of demonstrating here, change that to a 0.5 opacity and save it. Now, the reason why I was working with orange before is because you really couldn't see the white against white, obviously. And so now that brings that in. That looks a little garish in truth because it's just a little bit too harsh against there, that orange or that red. So I would definitely want to play with the colors here. But the very last thing I want to do, because if you remember, oh, I don't have that screen up anymore. But if you remember back in the opacity screen, I had pointed to a block of text that had a background to it. And we have certainly learned how to put in backgrounds through embed codes, but the truth of the matter is it's far easier here to go ahead and leverage Google's ability to lay in a background in the head, right? And note, of course, we could do all of this to a standard box down here too. We could have had a box, we could have put it in a color, we could have put it in an image, we could have been putting in a transparent box. All of that works. So I'm going to go ahead and select an image here just to show you guys what that's going to look like. And there is something that's okay. For my final sample, I'm probably going to tweak it in terms of size and in terms of color of this font. I'm going to actually, because that bothers me so much, I'm going to change this, oops, to blue. And here I could use a hexadecimal value, I could use an RGB color, I could use a couple different kinds of things. Save that. It's a little bit better. I might want to also change, or it could even go to black. And then increase the lightness of the background. I'm going to stop this video here. I want you guys to go try all of this, and then you can certainly tweak it. By the time you look at my example, I may have played with some of the color combinations a little bit more, but in essence, this is what I had wanted to do. Keep in mind that in order to make this box grow, I would have to leverage my understanding of the box model. And again, I may go ahead and add that to my final example, but I'm going to leave that to you to try to play around with your colors, get color combinations that you like, and try to play around with your box sample. And then I'm going to view that published site. Note also, too, that you could have done some weird things in terms of hovering, but I'm not quite sure hovering up here is the way to go. Also, too, notice that once I go out to my actual page, I've got this silly little scroll bar here, and that's because my box is not matching up to my content area. So what I would definitely have to do is go back in and play with my box model size. I will go ahead and tweak it. I will go ahead and put it into the final code that you can reference off of the instructional page. But for now, that's it. Go for it. Submit your work via Google. Bye.